Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Tim Donner, Andrew Moran, John Klar, and Dave Patterson, and this is the Conservative 5, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. Former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden have secured the delegates to put them on the ballot in November for their respective parties. And while number 45 seems filled with optimism, Biden appears to be losing his cookies with West Wing staff and whomever he comes in contact with. America watched in horror and a little bit of fascination as the State of the Union stump speech was screamed at the cameras. Even NBC cobbled a tell-all from White House staffers who described their boss as angry and embittered. There is no one better than Tim Donner to reveal what's happening behind the scenes and what it means.
Well, it's not pretty in the White House, and they know it. And if anything, it's actually getting worse. You know, people focus on the fact that Trump is ahead by 2 points now in the national average. But to put it into context, in the entirety of the 2016 and 2020 campaigns, he did not lead in the popular vote even once. And yet he won one of those elections and came very close to winning the other. So the fact that he is leading it all in the popular vote is very indicative. The real state of the race can be found in the 7 battleground states. Not only does Trump lead in the 7 states that will decide the election, he leads in every one of them. He leads outside the margin of error in 5 out of those 7 states. That means that according to these polls, if the election was today, Trump would win all 7 battleground states and win, if not a landslide, a decisive victory. But look even deeper, and you see the 2 polls recently that had likely voters as opposed to registered voters had Trump up 7 in one poll nationally and up 8 in the other. So, I mean, among likely voters, the situation is grim for Joe Biden to the point where Donald Trump really could start looking at trying to capture states like New Hampshire, Minnesota, Virginia, that are kind of light blue. The campaign is so desperate that they jump on something like Bloodbath Gate to make it seem like it's a call for political violence, when even they admit that it's conflated. But they say, but it's consistent with everything that he's always said. So I think the biggest mistake that the Biden campaign is making now, and this was in the NBC News article about Biden screaming and carrying on and swearing in the Oval Office or wherever he was meeting, is that they still believe that Trump is, in the words of the NBC article, eminently beatable. Are they whistling past the graveyard is the question. I think we've reached the point, ladies and gentlemen, where the only one who can beat Donald Trump now is Donald Trump, because Joe Biden isn't going to beat him.
You know, John Klar, by the way, welcome to C5, because we haven't had you on here before, and it's kind of exciting. One question I hear all the time, does Trump have enough crossover voters? I mean, his base won't waver, but he needs more than just some MAGA votes. So where's he going to get them?
Well, I've been really trying to watch this election year. It's quite unusual. We've never seen anything like it. We have a third party candidate, by the way, that's lost in these polls, and I'm not sure where that might slice things. And as Robert Kennedy chooses a vice presidential running mate, that might also draw some of those independents. We have a larger proportion of self-declared independents now than when Ross Perot ran. We have much more, I think, disenchantment from each side for the other. And so I would actually call this the 3 halves of America. Half of America will not accept Donald Trump as their president. Half of America will not accept Joe Biden as their president. And the middle half will accept Robert F. Kennedy, who seems to blend some ideas from both. So we have that wild card in here as well. But certainly I see denial Tim mentioned Donald Trump destroying himself, but Joe Biden seems to have already done so, and always blaming others like he does for inflation. And it reminds me of Hillary Clinton blaming Jill Stein or anyone but herself for her gaffes during that election.
And you know, here's another thing I don't understand about the Biden administration, and um, how does he try to spin? I mean, he's got to be frustrated. I'd be frustrated if this was my economy. How does he spin with those voters? He said he was going to save the soul of the nation when they can't afford a pound of hamburger. You know, Andrew, I know you keep a close eye on all these things, but America's not happy. I don't think anybody in America is happy unless they're so out of touch they don't ever go to the grocery store.
Well, this is an economy for the really wealthy, and I'm never one to slam wealth at all. But for everyone else who's not in that, and I'm going to sound like Bernie Sanders here, that top percent, they're not doing very well. But for the Biden administration, what they do is either they misinterpret, they mislead, or they just engage in mendacity. I think that State of the Union address was a perfect illustration of how the campaign is going to handle the economy. He said, and this was, pretty much ignored by the mainstream media. He said that the U.S. had the lowest inflation rate in the world. But this was completely frustrating because that's such a basic fact that you can dispute. Canada, thank you, Japan, China, the Eurozone, they have lower inflation rates than the United States right now. And of course, he ignores all the other things too. I remember Chris Hayes of MSNBC, he was looking at a graph of gas prices, and he started from when it was above $5 a gallon in June 2022 and to the present day, but it completely avoided of when it was, $2.40 of when Joe Biden was sworn into office. So it's these types of maneuvers that both the administration and the media are going to employ heading into November. And of course, it's an old Chico Marx joke. Who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious, unless you never leave your house and just order everything off Amazon. And even that has got to worry some people. But at one point, I want to bring up for how Joe Biden can pull himself out of a tailspin. Dave, it's the pro-Palestine. That's progressive. That's a lot of his people that put him in office, and they're unhappy. I mean, they're protesting at the White House. How's this going to, is he going to be able to reverse this before they go to the polls, or are they just going to hold their nose and vote for him anyway?
I think that probably they'll hold their nose and vote for him anyway. But I think also that we can't inflate the pro-Palestine progressives as a demographic. They aren't nearly as important, I would say, as the Jewish vote, for example. And most of these folks, if you look at the crowds, they're young, idealistic voters, and they tend to be more progressive as a group anyway. And the older folks who are in the crowds protesting in favor of Palestine also tend to include a variety of demographics. But I think in reality, the Biden camp just simply cannot lose the Jewish vote. And they're a larger demographic, as I mentioned. And, as former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer mentioned recently, the more Orthodox synagogue attending Jewish voters have been traditionally more conservative. And now when, Biden becomes openly hostile to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he can anticipate that more of the Jewish voters who don't attend synagogue regularly might lose their allegiance to the progressives. And I believe that's where the tipping point really is.
He's lost. I mean, he has lost the support of all of his major constituencies that he relied upon in 2020 to win a narrow victory over Trump. Black voters are abandoning him in droves. You've got 25% support among Black men for Trump. That's not an outlier either. That's consistent through a number of polls, including Gallup. He is actually losing Joe Biden is losing the Hispanic vote by 6 points to Donald Trump, according to the New York Times poll. That could be the single biggest indicator of the disaster that is the Joe Biden campaign. Think about it. Here's Donald Trump, who came down that golden escalator and talked about, well, shall we say in the harshest possible terms, about people coming over the border from Mexico, calling them rapists, all this stuff. And here we are 8 years later, and Donald Trump has majority support from Hispanic voters. And in part, that's because they see the border problem like everybody else. But it is in part because he has ignored these constituencies and he has surrendered to the progressive left with policies that are just utterly inconsistent with the mainstream of Black and Hispanic and Jewish voters.
Well,
I think Tim's right.
I for one, can attest from growing up in a very predominantly Hispanic location in the United States. They don't like illegal immigration. I have Hispanic relatives. They don't believe in illegal immigration. And they're very conservative, and that's not going over well with them. So maybe that's going to be
But the Democrats have always
point.
acted as if they let more illegals in, they'll get more Hispanic support. And in fact, you want to talk about a backfire. That's exactly what has happened here, because by letting in all those illegals, the people that are here legally, the people that are here that are citizens, the people even with green cards, are not supporting illegal immigration, and it's backfired now in the most spectacular possible way on Joe Biden.
Especially with sanctuary cities. Well, you guys, there's no doubt surprises are going to show up in the next few months, not just in October, but we kind of figured 2024 would be a grudge match. So buckle up. We're in for a roller coaster ride, and thanks, panel, for joining. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all as well. Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.